Harvard rescinds Kyle Kashov's acceptance to college. Texas law threatens Planned Parenthood sex ed. Teacher facing 36 abuse charges with first-grade girls. And a high school valedictorian destroys an alcoholic teacher and a guidance counselor in her valedictory speech. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Every week, Katie and I cover those stories that impact K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Greetings to all of our listeners, and if you haven't done so, please consider subscribing to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, anywhere else where you can get podcasts. And I know you want to follow us on Parler. Parler is a new social media platform very similar to Twitter, but not political, created by libertarians to actually protect and promote free speech, not squelch it if you're a conservative. Under the Users tab, just follow Freedom Project, Duke Pesta, and Katie Petrick. Later in the show, we're going to take a look at our award-winning Battles of America series, another animation for you, starting with the Battle of Lexington and Concord. In a few weeks also, we're going to be hosting a special edition of the Dr. Duke Show for the holiday, devoted to answering your questions. The entire episode of the Dr. Duke Show will be dedicated to nothing more than your questions. So if you want to know if I wear boxers and briefs, the answer is commando, baby. I'll answer that for you. If you want to know where Katie gets all that Argyle stuff and how cheaply she pays for it, ask those questions. Or if you have actual educational questions you'd like to ask us, so visit freedomproject.com/askduke, freedomproject.com/askduke. Simply enter your first name, submit your question, and we'll dedicate a whole show to those questions. Again, freedomproject.com/askduke, and submit your question there. We'll be answering your questions in just a few weeks, and I know you're excited about that. Katie, what one question would you like to ask me?
Definitely not boxers or brief. No one wants to know that. No one needs to know that. No one should know that.
Like Cosmo Kramer. The boys are loose, and I'm loving it, Jerry. Now that we've stunned Katie into a repulsed silence, we can introduce our first story of the day, which is about Kyle Kashov, the young activist from the Parkland shooting who is now disinvited to Harvard because of some disturbing, to be very frank, disturbing racial things he said a while back. Set the scene for us, Katie, about what did Kyle Kashov actually say to get him disinvited from Harvard?
So it just came out in the news. Kyle announced this week that his application, his acceptance into Harvard was rescinded, and it's based on comments that he had typed into basically a Google Doc, a private document 2 years ago when he was 16 years old. A group of his friends they said, this is according to Kyle, would type in the most kind of ridiculous things and try and rise to who can get the most reaction out of it. And Kyle has fully admitted that what he did was wrong, and if you read the comments, they are clearly wrong. They are racist comments. They should never have been said by anyone, and Kyle has admitted to that.
So a few weeks ago, I was made aware of some extremely terrible things I said when I was 16, so about 2 years ago, months before the shooting. I immediately apologized, not because I had to, because it was the right thing to do. The reason why this was released was that vindictive peers who disagree with me politically released it in hopes that it would kind of destroy my reputation in order so that they actually had the end goal of getting Harvard to rescind me. I think about 2 weeks ago, Harvard sent me a letter asking me for full accounting, and I did exactly that. I profusely apologized. I said, I want to right this wrong.
Yeah, and so Harvard University needs to be consistent. If what you're going to do is judge kids exclusively on what they may have said on social media, an odd moment where they're filmed saying or doing something, that's fine. Then do it for all kids. And that makes me wonder why David Hogg is still going to Harvard. We cannot ignore the facts of the story. Kyle Kashov finished second in his class at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. He was an excellent student with a 1550 SAT score, which is a remarkable score and in line with the kind of kids who get into Harvard. And so, fine, you want to disinvite him because he clearly made racist statements when he was a younger person, apologize profusely from them, acknowledge those racist statements, but okay, you're going to disinvite him. Why did you invite David Hogg to Harvard? David Hogg is a dramatically weaker student. Same school, same situation, SAT score of only 1270, which is respectable, one standard deviation below the SAT score of those usually accepted to Harvard. So he has lower GPA, he has lower SAT scores, he has lower all across the board academic credentials, but he's going to Harvard. And let me also point out that Kyle Kashuv said some pretty racist things, undoubtedly so. David Hogg defamed and lied and colluded with people like CNN to tell untruths in public forums. David Hogg has flat out lied about Dana Lash, about the NRA, about a whole host of things. His politics, his brand of social activism is based on hysteria, untruths, and lies. And that doesn't seem to disqualify David Hogg, with his much lower credentials, from getting into Harvard.
But because it's Kyle, and you can look at it...
He's conservative, we should mention.
This is true. Kyle, after the Parkland shooting, pretty much David Hogg and a lot of people had come out as students talking about how bad the NRA is, and like you said, saying
flat out lies
about Dana Lash. Meanwhile, Kyle was kind of the lone kid out of that school to come out and say and be in favor of the Second Amendment. So both David and Kyle and all these kids put themselves in the public limelight. Okay, so they knew, maybe they didn't at the time know going into it, any of their comments that would be said would be in the limelight. What Kyle never would have imagined, and quite frankly, all of the kids across the country right now, if you have a teenager, they don't consider anything you may have said in the past that now you're in the limelight. Even if everything you've said now currently in the limelight is great, which Kyle has, he's said no racist remarks, he's carried himself like a lot more professional than as a teenager than a lot of adults do. But they went and dug into his past. And that's where once you hit that limelight, you have to be expecting that. And all these kids who are now looking in the future, mom and dad at home, if you have some teenagers or kids who are even in their junior high, be prepared as to what could happen to them based on anything that they say on any social media platform, private or public.
Yeah, what I'd like to say is what you're seeing here from the progressive left, the fact that Kyle Kashuv is doomed to go to Harvard, while David Hogg is welcomed with open arms because of not perhaps lying about people publicly. When you repeat the lies again and again, when you are corrected for lying and you lie again, to me that rises to the same level of what Kyle Kashuv did one time. And so if you're going to leave David Hogg in and you're going to get rid of Kyle Kashuv, you have a problem. And this is the problem that liberals have with history. The progressive war on history is not just getting rid of Thomas Jefferson or deplatforming people who support American history, the Constitution. It's not simply rewriting history. It's your own personal history. If you're a liberal progressive kid like David Hogg, you can make all the mistakes you want and still get into Harvard, and those mistakes are forgiven because your progressive politics indemnifies you from your racial or your difficult relationship with the truth. Your progressive politics indemnifies you. If you're a conservative kid, your history is frozen in time. Right? The same way we don't go after Margaret Sanger the way we go after Thomas Jefferson, right, is the same, because one's a liberal and one's a conservative, is the same way David Hogg gets a pass and Kyle Kashuv gets screwed.
Okay, well, let's go to Texas because the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, has been very, very busy the past couple weeks signing tons of legislation. And one of the things that has been going into effect is involving actually the Austin Independent School District. So the Texas governor has signed a law that threatens Planned Parenthood sex ed curriculum, and that affects Austin Independent School District because they just proposed a sex education curriculum, which has been 3 years in the working, and it's supposed to, they're trying to work out the finality of it. But because of what the governor did, signing Senate Bill 22 into effect, it bans certain transactions between a governmental entity and an abortion provider or affiliate of the provider. And since Planned Parenthood is the one who basically wrote the sex ed curriculum, then it thereby affects Austin School District. So they're trying to figure out what the heck to do about it. The culmination of all this, the final lesson that they do, is actually involving a role play page. So one of the things is they're going to review all the sexual activity, and on this role play page, there's scenarios, and so the students have to answer the questions. One of the examples is describing a young lesbian couple, again, 7th grade, young lesbian couple, one of whom is pressuring the other to engage in oral sex. Her friends agree it will, quote, bring them closer together, end quote, but her mother wants her to wait until she is older. What should she do? And so they have all these different scenarios that the kids are going to have to kind of role play through and discuss with one another.
2 questions. One, when are they going to do all of this stuff? Where do they do all of this stuff? I mean, this is a serious, comprehensive form of sex education. And it's not just 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. It carries all the way through high school, different versions of this. And it starts even in elementary school in some instances. My question is, they spend all of this time in the public schools on all of this excruciating sexual minutia. It's not just about biology. Even if you think teaching birth control to kids is a good idea, even if you think so, you can do that in a health class one time and be done with it. This is comprehensive sex ed. And the role playing, right? Notice what the role playing is. In order to teach kids about safe sex or responsible sex or biologically protective sex, you've got a role play about oral sex and lesbians? It is utterly and entirely unnecessary aspect of this. What they're doing is, under the guise of comprehensive sex reform that's going to protect your kids from STDs and unwanted pregnancy, they are socializing all kinds of sex. They're using the excuse of protection to socialize your kids in progressive ways without really consulting the parents.
And what's interesting is that Abby Johnson, who people may know if you watch the movie Unplanned, she's the former Planned Parenthood director, so she knows better than pretty much anyone about what this sex ed curriculum really means. And she's also in Texas. She's the one who put a photo of this up on her Facebook, and she posted it with the caption saying, "As someone who used to teach this type of curriculum, you need to hear this." And she's not opposed to birth control being taught. So the purpose of these programs is not to help your children negotiate difficult sexual situations and to teach them refusal skills. The purpose is to teach them that these sorts of sexual situations are, quote, normal for their age, to teach them that their parents are not a safe place to turn when they have questions, and to get them into Planned Parenthood clinics so that they can further separate children from their parents. We mocked, and this is when she was director at Planned Parenthood, we mocked their peers who chose abstinence in front of them. Not all kids are in these situations at that age. Not all kids are exposed to these types of scenarios, and not all kids are sexually active at this age. But I can tell you firsthand that the people educating your kids through this program expect that they are, and they have zero problems telling your kids that it's completely normal if they are.
Well, and they, as Abby pointed out, they have zero tolerance for kids who aren't sexually active. The argument of 7th graders, 6th graders, this is a 6th grader potentially reading about 6th or 7th graders reading about 2 lesbian girls wanting to have oral sex with each other, and it's always mom's the problem, right? Notice what else it does. Mom's the one who gets in the way. The idea that mom might have a point, the idea that mom's morality or her religion or her family home where these kids live, that might have some bearing on the behavior of the children is utterly, utterly undercut by this. And you know what the moral of the lesson is, right? The 2 7th grade lesbians are allowed to have all the oral sex they want, regardless of what mom says, and we at the school are going to help you do it.
Yeah, and so they were supposed to have the vote on this week, but because of the bill that the governor signed, which puts into question what if Planned Parenthood can even have this now, they're going to delay it until August. So there's time for parents in Texas, in the Austin School District, to have a voice and kind of raise hell. Austin, for the record, is the 5th largest school district in Texas. There's 130 schools and more than 80,000 students.
And 80,000. Austin is one of the most regressively progressive places in the country. It rivals Berkeley, it rivals Madison, Wisconsin. It is a bad place, which means the disproportionate number of profligates who are going to think this is a good idea are much larger in Austin. And one wonders what impact this going on in Austin will have in the rest of the state. The rest of the state is much more sober and judicious about this kind of stuff than Austin, Texas is.
Well, we have a pretty horrific sounding story coming out of Springboro. This is in Warren County, Ohio. After a 3-month investigation, a now former Springboro Elementary Phi-Ed teacher has been indicted on 36 counts of gross sexual imposition. John Austin Hopkins, a 25-year-old, is in custody and faces third-degree felonies on accusations of inappropriate contact with first-grade girls at Clear Creek Elementary. Now, the 36 counts by the grand jury are relating to 28 different children. An investigation that they did for the past 3 months now has reviewed more than 100 instances of possible touching by 88 identified female students, and they were able to they got 36 counts now on 28 different children. And they had video of all these instances because they're in the gymnasium, so they had cameras, so they could actually pinpoint exactly what this man was doing. Warren County prosecutor David Fornshell said it was pretty apparent within the first day or so with the video that this was going to be bigger than, frankly, anything that we've ever handled as far as the number of potential victims. And he said there's video in the videos, they could see that Hopkins was placing the girls on his lap, the girls were straddling him, and he was putting his hands up their shirts, reaching up their skirts, or grabbing the kids' buttocks.
They loved him as a teacher because of the amount of affection that he was showing them. What these kids didn't realize was this was completely inappropriate and criminal.
While I was looking into this story, Warren County, a school nurse in the same county, has just pled guilty to sex charges. So there's a lot happening, and that's just in one little county in Ohio. So it could be happening anywhere.
Yeah, the thing about public schools is they are radically rejecting traditional morality. They are branding morality, humility, modesty. They're branding these hallmarks of Western culture, world culture actually, as now offensive. They're actually sexualizing classrooms, as we just saw in the previous story, to a remarkable degree, teaching 6th and 7th graders about oral sex between lesbians and the mom who wants to get in the way. You're breeding a permissive sexual culture, much more permissive sexual culture in the schools than you will find in most homes, almost all homes. Are we surprised that sexualization in schools is getting worse and worse and worse?
All right, real quick one. So I want to remind you to keep spreading the word on the Dr. Duke Show and liking, commenting, and sharing each and every episode on whatever platform you prefer, if it's Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and now Parler. And remember, Parler is the conservative-friendly Twitter that is seeing massive growth right now because big-name conservative personalities are signing up. So consider doing the same, and then make sure to follow Freedom Project, Duke Pesta, and little me, Katie. Don't forget to subscribe to the audio podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, and everywhere else. And if that's not your thing, subscribe to our Friday free e-blast. Simply visit freedomproject.com/subscribe to sign up, and then once a week, every Friday, you'll get all the stories that we cover. All right, we have a story in our backyard. We have a debate going on whether or not religion actually has a place in commencement speeches. So a commencement speech was recently given at Appleton North High School here in Wisconsin, and it was given by one of the members of the school board. His name is Reverend Alvin Dupree, and he referenced in his speech his Christian faith. But a group of 29 Appleton North High School graduates basically took exception to what he said, and they're claiming and complained in this letter that the speech was laden with Christian themes. So I know you had an opportunity to sit down with a good pastor and get his take on this, and let's go to that interview now.
Pastor Dupree, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Look, we really appreciate at Freedom Project your willingness to stand by what you believe. The thing that gets me, Pastor, is that these commencement ceremonies, whether it's for high schools or for colleges, have become places where you can say the most outrageous political things, where you can advocate for the most radical forms of progressivism. In your words, tell us what happened that day when you gave your commencement speech.
What took place that day, I was clearly introduced by one of the administrative leadership team as Pastor Alvin Dupree and school board member, at which point when I stood up, having been introduced as pastor, I referenced the principal's speech, who had stated that a source of his strength is his spirituality and his family, amongst a few other things. So I referenced the fact that the principal was free to state that it was his spirituality as a source of strength. Thus, I stated that my source of strength is that of my faith and my relationship with Jesus Christ. Whatever your source of strength is, you lean on it. Never let anyone make you hide it. For me, my source of strength is my faith and my relationship with Jesus Christ. It sounds like I got some believers in this room. If you're here, you believe that, go ahead and clap your hands. Upon graduation, fast forward, I'm receiving the class, and I'm shaking hands of all 400 plus students. And I can tell you that over 100 of them said thank you. Thank you for being open about your faith. God bless you across that stage. Prior to even leaving the building, over 300 plus parents and students walked up to me, shaking my hand, saying thank you for being open about your faith. It encourages us all to be who you are. Thank you that you didn't even force your faith on anyone. You're just very open about it. That was a clear observation to me that it was very much appreciated, and there was no backlash that I was really should have received. But I pretty much anticipated that would.
You knew
take
it was
place.
going to come, right?
I knew it was going to come.
We're not surprised, I suppose, in a situation like that where there would be a very small group that pushed back. When did the pushback come?
It came within days. That Saturday, as a matter of fact, I received an email from the superintendent saying that she had 5 or 6 kids who came to her office on Friday and pulled her out of a meeting to complain about the speech and how it made them feel excluded in that nature. So I'm looking at this and saying, yeah, okay, this is ridiculous. Well, that was that Saturday with the email. Well, that Monday, there was an open board meeting that was already on schedule. So there was individuals who supported me. Even the gentleman who was in the audience, the Muslim gentleman, he actually showed up at the board meeting in support
Of you.
of what I said and made it clear that although he disagreed with my theology and has a different belief, that it's important that everyone is allowed, especially in the public square, and the students directly within the schools are allowed to be open about what they believe. And again, I got to make it a point. He wants it clear that he does not agree with my theology, has a different viewpoint, but he does agree, and we have united in our efforts to make it clear that in our communities, we're not going to sit back as people of faith and just allow for the school district or any other organization that has this overwhelming power of influence that they're using to stir up the minds of our children and to get others literally on their side to rally to try to silence us.
It never ceases to amaze me that people, and we've taught this to our kids. Clearly in the Appleton School District, there are curriculum and teachers who push this on kids, this idea that in order to be inclusive, you have to exclude things.
Absolutely.
Right? That inclusivity means as a graduating senior, I shouldn't have to listen to one of 5 speakers express his personal faith, right, in Jesus Christ. I shouldn't have. I'm excluded because he did that. Now, nothing that any of the other 4 said, or including the spirituality, the vague spirituality mentioned by the principal, that wasn't exclusive. And so it's really odd to me that for many on the progressive side, exclusion, to be included means you have to exclude all sorts of things that you don't like. So this is a great layout of where we are now. So what do you think is going to happen next? And is there anything that we can do to help you?
Yes, I think it's important to be intentional on contacting local school board officials. As I stated previously, and we'll like to restate here, in 2016, when I ran for the school board, I was intentional on putting on that ballot Pastor Dupree, because I wanted to be clear that you're just not getting a token black man.
This is a man of faith.
This is a man of solid faith who's going to be open about that. I'm not going to hide that, and I'm not going to allow anything to deter that. And I have a compass that I'm driven by, and that's my faith. And if it's wrong, I'm going to speak up about it. Now, I'm just one vote, on a 7-man board. So I think it's important that even for those who feel it's important for them to be in opposition, I believe that it's important for me to state the fact that I fought for people to be able to publicly oppose me. So I'm not at all not necessarily upset about I have opposing views, because I think it's important that they understand that people put the uniform on so that they can oppose people publicly. It's okay. Freedom from religion, write your letter. People put their uniform on and fought for your ability to publicly call names. I think it's childish, being called ignorant and, level of stupidity. These things are childish, but you have a right to do that. But it's important for those of us who have faith to be able to express ours publicly as well. So writing letters to the school board, and as I stated during the election, you have people who don't want people's views to be heard. look at who's on the board, see where they stand on freedom of speech and truancy court and things that have been really hurting our community. And I say, vote them out in 2020 election. Get rid of them.
You were honest. You made it clear when you ran and on that ballot that they were voting for a Christian man, and you won that seat. And then your daughter graduated, and as was the custom, you got to speak at your daughter's graduation. And the purpose of commencement speeches is to inspire kids by sharing with them what inspired you.
Absolutely.
You did that, sir. And I know that your faith is strong enough that you've seen these kinds of pettinesses before, and I have absolute faith that you will continue to do the job you're doing. But again, take Pastor Dupree at his word. Go ahead and contact your local administrators, your school boards, wherever you live across the country, and let them know that free speech, that inspiration, that people's personal stories, regardless of where they come from, should be available to all these kids. And let's start teaching our kids that genuine inclusion means the willingness to hear people who disagree with us. And respectfully, you're not excluding anyone by sharing your story, especially the way you did it, right? By affirming for these kids. You find what your source of inspiration is. And if that's progressive politics, more power to you. If that's atheism, if that's whatever you believe, your source of power is Islam, you could go for
Absolutely.
it, right? That's what makes America great. I appreciate you and your commencement speech, sir, and we'll keep up with this story. And I'd like to add one more thing to the interview I had with the pastor. 29 kids complained that the speech was laden with Christian themes. Utter nonsense. He mentioned his personal commitment to Christ a couple of times. The audience spontaneously, without being coached, broke out into applause. This idea that, and these kids also complained, as the pastor said, that the speech, they felt excluded in the speech. So it just amazes me the degree to which we're teaching progressive kids that unless everything conforms to what they think, they're being excluded. Under the name of inclusion, we can stop the pastor from giving his own personal testimony. That's not America.
Well, and unless every one of those students was asked to rise and hear all of their great attributes, they were obviously excluded.
That's right.
But we meanwhile have a valedictorian who I think some teachers and counselors wish she had excluded them
right, or
from
had
her
been
speech.
Silenced. Right.
So there's this viral video going around, and it's from San Ysidro High School in San Diego. And Natalie Burr is the valedictorian, and she blasted in this speech her alcoholic teacher and her, quote, unavailable guidance counselor for both of them teaching her valuable lessons during her senior year. Watch some of this.
To the teacher who was regularly intoxicated during class this year. Thank you for using yourself as an example to teach students about the dangers of alcoholism. Being escorted by police out of school left a lasting impression. To my counselor, thanks for teaching me to fend for myself. You were always unavailable to my parents and I, despite appointments. Only in these past few weeks, with the award ceremonies and graduation coming up, did you begin making your appearance.
I love how these schools work. You mention Christ and everybody gets offended. But when a student like this tells the truth about the crappy service, the crappy teachers, the crappy counselors she had, then the schools are suddenly balking at this too, right? It's amazing, isn't it, that the one, other than mentioning Christ as a personal testament when you're giving a commencement speech, how dare you call the schools out for their inefficacy?
I do like how she said in that clip, and she was speaking about her counselor, and basically, thank you for letting me fend for myself here in high school. You were always unavailable to my parents and I, despite having made appointments, so that's good. But when she talked about the alcoholic teacher, she says, to the teacher that was regularly intoxicated during class this year, thank you for using yourself to teach these students about the dangers of alcoholism. Yeah. And then being escorted out of school left a lasting impression.
Good. Enough of this now. If we mean free speech, then let the valedictorian say what they want. It is an interesting caseload here, an interesting potential case here, that the same schools who want to carefully regulate so that kids aren't excluded are the ones that now are the school's very unhappy that she said these things.
Well, it's like in the letter for Reverend Dupree, how the kids claim they made their requests, and they said that every speech should be basically looked through and detailed.
And censored.
But would it be their same opinion if it was one of their fellow classmates kind of talking back to the teachers or the counselors or that? It's only, again, like we always say, it's whatever their progressive values are. It has to align with what they believe. Not truth, but what they believe to be true.
And the problem with these schools and the problem with progressivism in general is they've decided there's only one way to see everything. These are the same people who are telling us, conservatives, you've got to see the world beyond your biblical reality. You've got to see the world outside of your conservative policies. You've got to get the story about American life outside of Fox News. Okay, fine. But we progressives, we don't have to do that. We don't have to listen to you. We don't have to listen to your speeches, your personal testimonies, or the inspiration you derived from Jesus Christ during a commencement speech. That's not necessary. And keep in mind, Pastor Dupree is a Marine who fought in Afghanistan, a guy who sat here right next to me in Katie's seat and said, look, everybody should be able to have their testimony. Everybody should be able to testify to what they believe in. The story about how there was a Muslim in the audience who came up to Pastor Dupree and said to him, you and I have different theology, but I applaud your right to say what you have the right to say. We all need to be able to do that. What you're not hearing from the media accounts of Dupree's story is literally hundreds. There were 400 people in that room, and upwards of 250, 300 of those people made a beeline to Pastor Dupree afterwards to tell him how much they appreciated his standing up for his faith. You've got 29 kids who complained, and as the pastor pointed out, they all complained in the same way. The same scripted letter from freedom from religion groups, right? Grow up and get over it.
All right. Well, Burr was definitely savage in her comments. And now give us an update on how savage things are happening over at Oberlin.
Yeah, Oberlin College. We find out now that not only do they lose in court the punitive damages that have come along with it, we're talking $33, $44, possibly $1 million. It will end up being not that big. But still, piling on the courts recognizing that what was done here was a institutional effort on the part of Oberlin College to try to punish this little local bakery in the name of social justice activism. And so a jury awarded over $11 million initially in damages to the family for being defamed as racist by its college students and officials. The motion was later followed by a whopping $33 million punitive award. What gets me about this, Katie, is how utterly unrepentant the college is. The college is sticking to its guns. They're blaming the bakery. They're blaming everybody but themselves for this. They're saying that we're not responsible for what our kids say. Well, boy, isn't that nice? What if every university in the country realized that, hey, let your kids have free speech. You're not telling them what to say. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing if every university operated under that premise instead of only operating under that premise when you get your fingers caught in the social justice progressive cookie jar?
Well, and if we also remembered that these technically aren't kids, they are adults.
Yeah, can we stop calling them kids? Can we please stop calling them children? They're not kids. They're old enough to vote. We're going to lower that to 16.
Yeah.
They're old enough to drive cars. They're old enough to go fight in wars. They're old enough to have lesbian sex with each other in their dorm rooms without having to ask mommy's permission. They're old enough to hear language or speak for themselves.
But they're not old enough to drink, and that's what got them in the problem in the first place when they tried to steal the alcohol, and that's when this whole thing started.
Yes, these kids were under 21.
These 3 kids, yes. So they tried to steal the alcohol. They got caught. Of course, the Oberlin College said claims of racism. It was clearly racist because they were black students.
Well, you know the old argument, liquor stores in black neighborhoods, right? And even though Oberlin is one of the whitest places in the whole history of whitedom, the fact is you've got a liquor store or a store that sells liquor in a college which has some African-American students. This kind of social justice thinking is the goofy stuff that they do.
And that's what's so interesting is a lot of the reports that have come out since this, I'm going to give credit here to Daniel McGraw. He reported for legal insurrection, and he was actually at the trial every single day. And so he got all these details that came out. And one that was actually kind of fascinating goes to your point about, black kids in liquor stores in these neighborhoods. They actually took a look at, statistically speaking, who got busted for shoplifting. And
which Oberlin kids had been busted over the years for shoplifting.
And what do you know? It was, the percentage of white kids was about the percentage that live in that town. The percentage of black,
87 or something.
Something in the 80s. And the percentage of the black kids who got caught were the percentage of the black kids. Right. And then 5% Asians. So anyway, so Daniel McGraw put out all this information to give you kind of more of the backstory of it. When you take a look and read this entire article, it talks about how Oberlin was so invested in what this whole case was about. They were so in with everything that they did against Gibson's Bakery, and they're the ones that are calling it racist. And the thing that, when I read that David Gibson, he's one of the owners, all he wanted, they didn't want to do this lawsuit, all he wanted was for Oberlin to say that our bakery and market is not racist. We are not racist. That's it. It actually says in David Gibson's testimony, he had repeatedly offered to drop the lawsuit if only they would just say, we're not racist, and the school refused. Because they're in a small town. Mm-hmm. This bakery and market has been open for almost 130 some years almost. And if you get labeled racist, that sticks with you. You're in a small town. You can't get over that.
The college is the town. It's a typical town and gown setup where the college is everything, right? The Oberlin is known only for its college. Oberlin, no one knows the first thing about Oberlin or its surrounding environs. You just know the college. So if this college calls you out as racist and aggressively labels you as racist, as this is what the jury recognized, right? That this is going to do lasting damage for years and years and years. And all this poor bakery owner, he didn't want reparations. He didn't want a reinstitution of the contract with the school. He just wanted the administrators to say, we regret calling them racist. And $44 million later, the cost of that one phrase, right? Oberlin won't pay it because of their social justice pride.
Yeah, and so David had said, he testified that he met with Oberlin officials at least 3 times in the months after that, these big protests that had gone on, and we know about different employees from the university who basically led the charge on this and organized it. David said, so after that fact, he met with them and just give me a statement. Just say, our bakery is not racist, and they refused every single time.
I'd like to close by pointing out, and you gave that journalist a lot of well-deserved attention. I want to do a quote here from Jonathan Turley, who also wrote about the Oberlin case, and 2 very trenchant paragraphs. He said, quote, "We are reaching the critical point in higher education in the United States, where leaders are ceding control to a small group of activist students and faculty members. Too often, those challenges are met not with acts of conscience, but with cowardice. Professors fear being labeled as either insensitive or racist for objecting to protests or changes on campus. Meanwhile, the costs mount with no reflection from administrators. Even with $44 million in total damages, Dean Raimondo remains Dean of Students at Oberlin College, and the college remains unapologetic. Oberlin was founded in 1833 on the belief that, quote, it is peculiar in that which is good. What happened at Gibson's Bakery was neither good for Oberlin nor for higher education, and that's exactly right. The administration here are cowards. They are afraid of their kids. The faculty members are turning the kids into radical leftists, intolerant, uneducated, bigoted leftists. The university administrators, who should know better, are afraid of those kids and afraid of what the faculty will do if they try to bring order. So they double and triple down on what the students want and what the faculty agitates for and what they think they have to do. And even when they've been proven in a court of justice to be wrong, even when the entire sentiment almost of the country recognizes what they've done to the small business, they still refuse to sacrifice their social justice bona fides for the truth.
Since Oberlin College won't provide an education, we will. We're going to provide some real education, and today we're taking a look at our national award-winning series, Battles of America. We kick things off with the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Take 3 minutes to soak up the great history of this battle, beginning in 1764. Enjoy.
Battles of America, Lexington and Concord. Beginning in 1764, Great Britain passed several acts to raise more revenue from taxes on the American colonies. These acts, such as the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and Townshend Acts, infuriated the colonies and inspired the phrase, "no taxation without representation." With the colonists' continued resistance to these acts, the British Parliament believed they had no choice but to declare the colonists in rebellion and sought to subdue them permanently. The plan was to arrest opposition leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington and end the militia by destroying their weapons and ammunition in Concord. On April 18, 1775, Dr. Joseph Warren, a prominent Boston physician, learned of the British plan. He sent riders William Dawes and Paul Revere to alert Adams and Hancock and the militia to hide their ammunition. Then, on the morning of April 19th, 700 British soldiers, led by Major John Pitcairn, marched to Lexington, where 77 waiting Minutemen faced them. Vastly outnumbered, the colonists' Captain Parker ordered the militia to disperse. Just then, a gunshot rang out which caused the British and the militia to begin fighting. To this day, no one knows who fired the first shot. When order was finally restored, 8 of the colonists lay dead, and 10 more were wounded. Only one redcoat had been harmed. The remaining members of the militia quickly fled the area. After the small triumph at Lexington, the British marched toward Concord. They encountered little resistance from the colonists at first, so they began to comb the entire town for the hidden stockpiles. They burned what few arms they found. Unbeknownst to the British, hundreds of militiamen were watching them from the other side of the North Bridge. When the colonists saw the fires, they mistakenly assumed their whole town was going to be burned as well, so they rushed to the North Bridge to attack the small company of British soldiers who were defending it. The British fired first, but retreated after the militiamen returned fire. This skirmish is what's referred to as the shot heard around the world, penned by Ralph Waldo Emerson in his poem Concord Hymn. The shot signified the beginning of the Revolutionary War. Unable to find any other arms, the rest of the British soldiers began to march back to Boston. The militiamen followed them and persistently shot at and harassed them all the way back to town. The news of these battles spread rapidly, and their success proved that the colonists could stand up to the most powerful army in the world. None of them could know that they had just embarked on a brutal 7-year journey to complete independence from Britain.
Katie, where was the trigger warning that violence was involved in that video? How inappropriate for school-age kids.
Konnichiwa, and welcome to this week's Extra Credit, brought to you by the biggest victims of all the victims. And we begin with the claim that a transgender collegiate track star is the victim in girls' track because of the hormones he is taking to be able to compete as a female in the 400-meter hurdles, which he just beat all the women to win the NCAA D2 National Championship. Cece Telfer runs track for Franklin Pierce University and went on outside the lines to bemoan how he's the victim.
Anything, me competing against cisgender females is a disadvantage because my body is going through so many medical implications, like it's going through biochemistry changes.
Like as JT says, cry me a river.
A body that is African American and male, which, let's be very blunt, tends to be a good body for running track and field, now is arguing that he is at a disadvantage because he's taking hormones, and the girls who are running have an advantage over him. Can progressivism get any dumber?
A political science professor at Grambling State University is crying a river in filing a lawsuit claiming his victimhood status was established when he originally developed Black Panther. You know, the superhero movie by Marvel? David Lewis Whitehead is now suing Marvel Entertainment, Netflix, Viacom, and Walt Disney Inc. for allegedly conspiring to steal his story titled Batman, Black Man, which has striking resemblances to Black Panther. Whitehead is demanding a jury trial and wants $10 billion in compensatory damages from the companies. Lest you think this man is sane, he has claimed Apple and other entities stole his material in the past, including Passion of the Christ and Austin Powers.
I think Black Panther was actually written by a white Jewish dude in the 1970s, and the Gospels dealt with the Passion of Christ also about a white Jewish dude 2,000 years ago.
Moving up to the Midwest, we have a student at the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, who is the victim of being told, hello. But it must not have been told in Adele's voice and was said by a food service worker when the student went to pay for a snack. The worker said something the student didn't understand and had to explain that she was saying hello or good afternoon in Japanese. She asked where the student was from, and the student said, Wisconsin. Then the worker laughed and told the student to have a nice day. But a nice day was not had, and the student went to the Bias Response and Referral Network, claiming, quote, these types of microaggressions occur too often on campus, and this implicit bias needs to be addressed, end quote. I now have a microaggression that the Asian American student had no idea that konnichiwa was hello in Japanese. That's what needs to be addressed.
I long for the days, not that long ago, when you tried to speak other languages to people, they loved it. Right? When you tried to encounter people and meet them on their own cultural landscape, that was seen as a gesture of kindness. Now, it's a bias incident.
We will end with an actual victim, Thomas Jefferson, who can't celebrate his birthday, mostly because he isn't alive, but also because he's just a racist to those in Charlottesville, Virginia, the city where he designed and founded the University of Virginia. Jefferson's birthday has been celebrated as a city holiday, but now Mayor Nicoya Walker wants to replace it with Liberation and Freedom Day. The University of Virginia, by the way, already does not celebrate Jefferson's birthday. And so continues the endless cycle of not being able to do anything good for anyone, ever, if you've done something that is now considered bad, though it was legal at the time you did it. I guess you better tear down the university while you're at it.
Yeah, Jefferson built that university, and so rather than allowing that university to exist in perpetuity as an apologia, get rid of the university. Eradicate every aspect of Jefferson's lives, you hypocrite liberal idiots.
And that's your extra credit for this week. Now, if you have any stories you'd like to suggest, just type them in the comments section and then smash that like button and share the episode. And don't forget to subscribe to the Dr. Duke Show and audio podcast on iTunes and leave us that precious 5-star review and a couple nice comments or two.
That does it for us this week on The Dr. Duke Show. If you like what you heard, again, please share the audio and video with your friends. Next week, we're going to get educated on our nation's second president and Katie's favorite person in the whole wide world after me, John Adams. So please come back for that, another video. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and we'll see you next week.